For those of you who have been with us throughout this Lenten season, we have been reading through various parts of the Gospel of John. And several times we have encountered some of the 7 signs of John. And remember that we were learning along the way that the sign is not what seems to be the miracle itself, but what it creates. So, for example, the first sign of turning water to wine. Thank you. Right? That is miraculous enough itself, but that in itself is not the sign. The sign is what it creates. And what it creates is continuation of celebration. The continuation of the people being together to celebrate that joyous occasion of unity, of a couple in marriage. The sign of the healing of the nobleman's child. Again, miraculous healing. But the sign is not of the healing alone. It is what it creates. It creates and reminds us that healing is for all, even for those who might oppress us. The feeding of the 5,000. Again, miraculous enough. But what is most miraculous and the creation of what it created, this sign, is that people were fed and did not have to leave. People did not have to migrate away from that place, but were able to share in food together, and the sharing was led by a boy. Child shall lead us in the way of creating community and life and feeding, and not making us forced to walk to have livelihood. The healing of the man or the one born blind. You remember this story, again, miraculous sign, but the real sign is what it created. It created for the man a community of inclusion where he was excluded otherwise. And even in the end, we see that the authorities exclude him again as they do not trust his witness, as they continue to hold his past and their notions of his past against him. Jesus is saying, no, we never do that with one another. We do not hold one another's past against the other. It is not the cause of his sin. It is not the cause of his ailment, rather. It is not sin. And so Jesus then includes him in community, even though he was expelled. And then we have the Lazarus sign, the resurrection of Lazarus, or the resuscitation of Lazarus. The sign that even though there may be a delay, that we are a people, and our God is a God who brings things that go to sleep and to death back to life. And so the sign is what is created. And so this day, we focus on the sign. And so it's not just about Jesus' death. It's about what his death creates. It creates community in solidarity with the oppressed. We see Jesus, like so many throughout history, and even to this day, who continue to be oppressed by powers, governmental powers, that thwart their rules on people, and whereupon people's lives are put in danger, and they die. We see religious authorities and powers doing the same. And when they are in synergy together, look out. It is not good. And we see Jesus who walks with those who find themselves in those positions. We see throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus' prayer that we will hear again in a couple weeks, where he prays that all might be one, come to be. We see it here in this story today, when Jesus says to the unnamed disciple, to his mother, "Here is your son." And then to the disciple, "Here is your mother." He's continuing to create community, continuing to invite people to come together. And we know that when tragic events happen, people do come together. And then when we know also when tragic events of great injustice happen, people do come together. And Jesus reminds us ever so clearly, at least twice in this reading tonight, that when we do so, we must never do so with violence. Ever. Jesus is creating community even in his death. We hear him say, "I am thirsty." And they give him sour wine. And he drinks it. It is the invitation for us as followers of Jesus to notice the sour wine that continues to be given to those in our midst. And we are invited to drink it with them and to accompany them in the difficulty and the struggles in which they find themselves. And perhaps walk one another as community to a place where there is continued celebration, to a place where there is healing for all, to a place where we have food with one another, to a place where it seems like it's only death, but then we celebrate life. And we do this through the acts of love. Love that is marked by humility. Those of you who were here last night will recall that Jesus gave the new commandment to love and then showed us what that meant by taking on the very action and position of a slave woman, which Peter tried to refuse and deny and wouldn't allow Jesus to do that. And Jesus said, "You must allow this, because this is the way of love for us to take those lowly positions of humility and to serve." And we see in this reading tonight this come alive by two men who were not at the supper where Jesus washed their feet and gave the new commandment, but who understood Jesus' way, even though they were disciples in secret. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Because what did they do? They took the humble position of women, because it was only women who anointed bodies for burial. It was not a job that men were to do. And it was especially not a job for men and priests to do before Passover, where they would become ritually unclean. And you see, they understood the way of humility has nothing to do with the rules of religion or the positions of society. It has to do with love. And so they did what was necessary, the most loving act, by not worrying about those things, and by wrapping Jesus and burying him. And you see, even in Jesus' death, we see what is created, communities of humbleness, communities of people in the pain, walking with one another and serving and caring for one another, even in its midst, even in the midst of our denials and in the midst of our betrayals. Jesus is continuing to call us and to move us into ways of love. And we will see tomorrow. I invite you all tomorrow night to read the Gospel of John, the 20th chapter, to read of the resurrection, of the new life that does spring forth, even more than the new life we've just seen now springing forth. Even in his death, we will see the amazing new life in his resurrection and as the community of people of his resurrection. So, my friends, this night is not just about sadness by any means. It is about new life. And for this, let us enter into this with grateful hearts. Amen.
Amen.